Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, deaths, like service peasants, vassals. I am Useful Idiot. Today I'd like to talk about cell phone surveillance, as your own telephone becomes part of the police state, surveillance state dragnet. So there was recently a congressional inquiry in about how much cell phone use was being done by law enforcement agencies and NSA and DHS and all the rest. And of course, it came to 1.3 million demands for subscriber data the last year from law enforcement agencies seeking text messages, caller locations, and other information. So, of course, this could mean anything, and it could mean anyone. And interestingly enough, of course, 1.3 million demands isn't quite accurate because, first of all, they're taking a number of situations where multiple parties are included in one phone request. So that would automatically jump the number to more like 4 or 5 million. But where it really gets interesting is where they have cell phone tower dumps, they call them, where literally hundreds of thousands of cell phone conversations are gotten on a single phone call request. So in other words, as usual, law enforcement, NSA, DHS has been intercepting the cell phone calls and using cell phones to track people in the tens of millions would be a more accurate number. And this information represents the first time that this data has been collected nationally to find out what was going on. And it supposedly surprised even officials. In fact, Representative Edward Markey of Massachusetts Democrat said, "I never expected it to be this massive." That shows a problem that we have in our government, that we have someone in Congress who authorizes this sort of activity, and yet he has no concept of how massive it will be and how much it will be abused. So another black eye on our congressional leaders who cannot even see the results of their own legislation that they ran through Congress that subverts our civil liberties. So, information was requested from 9 carriers, including AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon. And this is all a result of a New York Times article on the expanded use of cell tracking by law enforcement. So, once again, our government and our Congress isn't even aware that this is going on. They have to read an article in the New York Times to even be aware of the repercussions of their own legislation. So let's get down to some gruesome numbers here now. AT&T alone now responds to 230 emergency requests a day nationwide. And apparently Sprint led the way last year, reporting more than 500,000 requests. So there's a good example of how inaccurate these numbers are. If Sprint alone received 500,000 requests, just one telecommunications company, then how can there only be 1.3 million demands in total for 9 carriers? And in 2006, phone companies that cooperated in the Bush administration's secret program of eavesdropping were taken to court, sued, and were soon granted immunity. And that's something that needs to be a reminder to all Americans that under the Bush administration, the telecommunications companies were given immunity from any lawsuits involved with their partnership with our government and the police and the military in order to surveil Americans. So once again, we find bipartisan agreement, Democrats and Republicans walking down the same aisle, 2 administrations in a row that are protecting telecommunications companies, creating a partnership with them, and spying on Americans on a vast scale. Under federal law, carriers said they generally required a search warrant, a court order, or a formal subpoena to release information about a subscriber. But in cases that law enforcement officials deem an emergency, a less formal request is often enough. We know what that means. We can read that and know what it means. But in cases that law enforcement officials deem an emergency, a less formal request is often enough. So therefore, there are no rules whatsoever. The law enforcement declares it an emergency. The private companies hand over the information. That's how it's done, even though more than likely none of these situations are emergencies, and in fact the data bears that out. So, the surging use of cell surveillance was reflected in the bills the wireless companies reported sending to law enforcement agencies to cover their costs. So this is another interesting component of the private-government partnership, also known as fascism, in the surveillance police state that's being assembled. So now, the government and law enforcement agencies, the police, the NSA, all pay these telecommunications companies handsomely to spy on Americans and hand over the data. Some of the figures, AT&T, for one, said it collected $8.3 million last year. They earned $2.8 million in 2007. So 5 years later, they're getting $8.3 million a year from the government and law enforcement agencies as a profit to spy on Americans. How despicable is this? So, also, it says also the total number of people whose customer information was turned over could be several times higher than the number of requests, because a single request often involves multiple callers. So that's what I was speaking of earlier, where the $1.3 million figure is a distortion and a deception, and tens of millions of Americans have been spied on through this program. And another component of this that's kind of sinister is that some carriers have resorted to outsourcing the jobs. The outside provider, Newstar, said it has handled law enforcement compliance for about 400 phone and internet companies. So once again, there's another clue to what is going on here. We have a corporate-private partnership with telecommunications companies spying on Americans, and then we even have the telecommunications companies outsourcing that same contract to another private corporation that specializes in spying on Americans. And in this inquiry, of course, they found records for 9 carriers, as I mentioned earlier, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon. But, as just said in this article, there's another outside private company that subcontracted Newstar that works with over 400 phone and internet companies. So what scale is this surveillance really on? So there we have it, citizens. There we have it, America. We have another vast component in the rapidly assembling police and surveillance state in the United States of America. So now, your cell phones, as we already knew, are tracking you, are being tapped. They are listening to your phone conversations. They are following your movements. They are tracking your activities. They're looking at your internet use. Your cell phone is now your enemy. And we also know that the FBI has the technology to listen in on your phone conversations in real time and with no lapse. And they have no resorting to the law, subpoenas, or anything else to utilize that system, and it can be used even when your cell phone is turned off. So, welcome to another plank in the demise of America through our police and surveillance state. I am a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.